So I think we have one more question left, and then we're gonna end the session.
Yes, well, I want to ask you about two key concepts that you keep talking about every time that somebody has questions. And these concepts are scalability and iteration. And you have mentioned several times that it's really critical to do it fast. And there are a couple of industries where these two concepts are not like natural to have this velocity or speed as like in the software companies, for example, biotech or clean tech. So I would like to know, how does it change your approach to evaluate projects in this kind of industries regarding those two concepts?
So I had a really interesting example recently. I met, or actually I knew a really good entrepreneur from Buenos Aires. And I've known him for almost, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, and he just came to me recently, and to your point about space as the next frontier, he has a satellite startup idea. And it's a really big idea. It's one of the biggest ideas I've heard, and if it works, he's going to be a billionaire. But in the first meeting, you know, when he sat down and told me the whole idea, I realized how big it was. The whole second half of our meeting was, okay, how do we take that big idea that's going to take 5 or 6 years to make successful? How do we break it into pieces? Because he's not going to do a $100 million Series A investment. And so we said, okay, so how can we break this down, and how can we take this? And ultimately, he's going to need something like $700 million investment or something to get this to be successful with. So we said, how do we do this in a way that it's economical, and that it's fast enough so that Google doesn't wake up one day and just eat us, things like that. And so he broke his product roadmap down into real small pieces, and he broke it into pieces where every step eliminated some technical risk, and that he could tangibly show. So without going into the secret of what he's doing, the first chunk he decided to do was to build a software simulator of the entire thing. And it turns out that the software simulator will demonstrate how the thing will work. But also, if the whole thing won't work, he can repurpose that and sell that as a piece of software. So I think that's what you have to do with some of these bigger things. I think some of my friends who are in clean tech, when the money was easy to get 3 or 4 years ago and they could raise $40 million rounds, they were just making big bets. So they wanted to make a certain kind of semiconductor wafer, and they build a whole line to do it. Now I think they would be much more likely to try to do a small experiment, kind of what this Mark was saying, do some small experiment first to show a step and then move forward. So I guess it's a long-winded way of saying, you can't get the velocity of a clean tech company to be as fast as software, so maybe what you need to do is break it into smaller milestones that show progress.
I know very little about this space, but I do have 2 examples of companies that have recently raised a lot of money and are in it for the long haul. So one of them is Silver Spring. And I remember I met the CEO about 4 years ago, and the company was already about 3 years into it. And the guy's like, wow, this is tough. And they hadn't raised a lot of money. And I think it was at the beginning when everybody really got excited about it. This was right after Al Gore's PowerPoint presentation or movie, or keynote presentation, sorry, it wasn't PowerPoint. But it did take a long time, and back to the point about breaking out into steps, they did have certain milestones, and basically the investors were coming in and funding those milestones as opposed to coming in and trying to fund a really big idea. The other project is Better Place. Better Place? The Israeli company, Battery. Yeah, it's great. I mean, I think they've raised like $600 million. Yeah, Shayak, yeah. Really sharp guy. They realized that they didn't need to create an electric car. They didn't need to create a new power plant. They didn't really need to do much of that. What they're doing is basically creating replaceable battery packs. And instead of going to a filling station, filling your car up with gas, you basically just swap out the battery pack and continue going. And they also have a proof of concept. They're launching in Israel. They're trying to test it out. But kind of initial steps, small steps until you get to your really big idea.
Just very quickly, what you mentioned on the scalability, I think this is a big challenge in clean tech and biotech. There are many things that turn out to work very well in a lab setup, and then from lab to mass production, it just takes 5 years, and sometimes you never get there. And I think there's a lot of learning there that needs to be coming together. I think we're in an age where manufacturing and computing power and simulation, for example, are coming together quicker, and these risks are lesser than they used to be, but they still remain very, very large. So when you're looking at these things, the third question should be, can you make it? Can you actually produce it, mass market?
It seems like a lot of these deals, in order to get to scalability, the strategy is actually just to de-risk the technology and validate to the point where you can attract and acquire that you can put it into the right channel. So it's been on the space. I've seen a number of very interesting medical companies doing clinical trials of Monterey. And so that's another strategy that companies are taking out, that it's just so hard to get through the FDA process, that they say, we're going to go get a CE mark first. We're going to do our clinicals in markets where it's more affordable and there's not the threat of lawsuits as much, and frankly that there's more access to patients for these trials, and that may or may not be a good thing, depending on how you look at it, but there's an ethical question, of course, and how they're doing their trials. But from my experience and what I've seen, they're highly ethical, and they're validating their product while they're doing meaningful treatments. And with that data, they're able to get marks that don't that aren't as rigorous as the FDA approval, but they're still accepted in major markets, Canada, take it to Europe, depending on what the market is. But sometimes when we were doing investments in the space in the States, a lot of time the regulatory path is, well, here's how we get to the FDA, do you want to fund it? And I think that more companies now are saying, how can we actually go out in an ethical way, test what we're doing in markets that don't have the same, red tape that the U.S. has. And at that point, a U.S. company then comes in and says, that's interesting, you've already validated the technology, we'll buy that from you, and we'll run it through the FDA, because they have the expertise to do that, and then they have the scale to take it beyond.
Perfect. So before we end this session, I and the team of SUMET, as a team, would like to thank the people in this panel, because most of you came from other parts of Mexico or across the country border and paid their own expenses to come here and share their experience with us. Oops. I think we need to talk later. And without you guys, this would not be possible, and I think this is the foundation of a series of events and a series of groups in a community that's starting. It's a very, very active and full of energy community that's starting to around entrepreneurs that can become something very, very important in Mexico and can make a difference. So I really want to give you a big applause for this. And we brought a couple of presents that we bought for you guys, showing this how much we appreciate that you took your time to come here and share your experience. Thank you very much. Following the session, we're going to be outside this place. And we're going to be doing a mixer event where we're going to be able to approach other people in the panel and ask personal questions and just get to network and speak about our startups. So thank you.